Okay, good morning and welcome to the first, I guess, in a while, the 2024 Martin Luther King Jr. National Holiday Assembly. We've come here today to celebrate Dr. King's life and accomplishments. Today we're taking a brief look at the role that Dr. King had in changing the racial outlook for many in the United States and around the world. And while there were many high points in the civil rights movement, many feel that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the greatest achievement because of how it has continued to influence the United States and all of its citizens. Its immediate impact was most dramatically felt by African Americans, but the truth is that equality and justice are colorblind, and these protections now enshrined in American law are just another step towards our nation being true to the ideals spelled out in the Declaration of Independence. Many things we take for granted are now in place as a result of those efforts. I would now like to introduce a video that includes a chorus of Silver Creek High School students who have each volunteered to read a short passage from Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. This particular speech is surely the most well-known, repeated countless and thousands of times as a window into the American dream of justice and equality. King reportedly worked on the words of this speech up to the last minute, but they are eloquent and meaningful, and they have joined an elite club of famous speeches given by American leaders during moments of national crisis. And I also want to thank in advance Mr. Smith for filming and editing this.
I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is deeply rooted in the American dream.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists and its governor with his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I'll go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
With this faith, we'll be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with a new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire.
Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania.
Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado.
Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California.
But not only that, let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain of Georgia.
Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee.
Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi.
From every mountainside, let freedom ring.
And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city,
we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Once again, want to thank those students that took part in that, as well as Mr. Smith for putting that together. In just a minute here, we're going to have the Silver Creek Band under the direction of Mr. Patrick Regan play a selection. Their selection today is What a Wonderful World, originally performed by Louis Armstrong. It is a relatively famous song whose lyrics express a sense of wonder and appreciation for the positivity and beauty in this world. And of course, it was chosen for a specific reason. It was released in 1968 at the very center of the civil rights movement and at a time of great unrest. In other words, it is a joyous song with uplifting lyrics and a pleasant melody released during a time that was marked with discontent and at times violence. For those of you paying attention in English class, the song is often part of what we call a juxtaposition, which is when two things are being seen or placed together with contrasting effect. For example, the song was re-released in 1988 as part of a movie called Good Morning Vietnam. In one scene, the viewer is shown images of war, death, injury, human brutality, while the song is being played in the background. The contrast in the lyrics of the song and the images. In summation, things are terrible and wonderful all at the same time. No matter what the circumstance, there's always joy in the world. And no matter how much joy there is, there's always work to be done.
At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. His name is Miguel Hampton, and I've known Miguel for a while now. Miguel is a father, a husband, an award-winning community leader and activist. Miguel is a creative and social entrepreneur. He's published fashion photographer and marketing superhero with a diverse managerial and creative background, which offers several levels of versatility to his clients and business. Miguel provides expertise in the way of business coaching, project management, event development, photography, video and film development, content creation, podcasting, and program facilitation. Please welcome Miguel Hampton, your keynote speaker.
Can I walk around? Do y'all mind? What's good? Are y'all awake this morning? So here, I'll tell you a little bit more, if I can jump in a little bit more. All right, cool. So first of all, I'm gonna tell you that my wife and my daughter tell me that I'm way too cerebral, and what I'm about to deliver to y'all a little bit is probably way too heavy in the morning. So I'm gonna let y'all can interrupt me. Y'all can ask me questions as I go through this journey, but I'm gonna ask y'all a few questions that I want you to ponder, because I really love more so the interest of what young people have. Like, what is your interest when you think about equity? And what does equity mean to you? What does civil rights mean to you today versus looking at our predecessors and looking at the history of America, or very specifically the history of Indiana, right? So again, I'm an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur. In the last year, we have launched several Q&As in our community, Clark and Floyd County specifically, about all the social injustices, right? So we talk about domestic violence, we talk about drug abuse, we talk about racial inequality, but more important, we also talk about economic inequality, right? By show of hands, and I'm curious, do you know what the economic freedom movement is? Anybody heard of it? Anybody know what the Rainbow Coalition was? Oh, cool, we gonna have some fun. I got one hand over there. All right, let's go, let's get it. All right, cool. So I'm gonna introduce you to a couple of my favorite people, right? So you might take a note, you might write it down, and as I maneuver through this speech, this delivery, somebody can raise a hand and say stop and say it again. Is that cool? Got it, get it, good, we can rock. Do I get your permission to ask you questions? All right, cool, let's go. So other than Martin Luther King, somebody else I wanna introduce you to is Fred Hampton. Right? So I'm gonna bounce back and forth. So Martin Luther King was born in 1929 and he was killed in 1966. Really important to understand is in the I Have a Dream speech. He said this was the beginning, not the end, right, of a thing, of civil rights, of a revolution in a sense. Fred Hampton, who was born in Illinois in 1948, died in 1969, at 20 years old, was one of the few activists in the country who were actually assassinated by police. Fred Hampton so uniquely galvanized 3 gangs in Illinois, right? It was I don't remember. So it was a white coalition, right, that was fighting for economic improvement. Then there was the Hispanic and Latino, the Puerto Rican movement, which was also fighting for the same thing, and then the Black Panther Party, and I'll identify them later. So unique thing, right? Fred Hampton was fighting in Illinois for equality and economic equality. We know that Martin was fighting with both politicians and individuals, right? Galvanizing the vote, but was talking more about civil rights. Right before Martin was assassinated, do you know what he was really talking about? Anybody want to guess? Economic development. The whole base is that if we as Americans could make everything equal, right, we could bring equity, we could remove the inequalities that were happening economically, we would actually arrive at this thing that we call the American dream. Y'all follow me so far? All right. The other person I'm gonna introduce you to, everybody know who Malcolm X is, right? Yeah, you know, anybody know what he was fighting for and where he was fighting at? He was in New York, arguing for the same principles, just in a different space. He was born in 1925, died or assassinated in 1965, right? So what I wanna do is give you a quick parallel. Does anybody know when the first slave ship landed in the United States? Good guess, just guess, throw out a number for me. 1660, close, 1619. So I'm gonna take this back a little further. So I'm gonna show you how long it takes for change to occur or a situation to arrive. But I'm gonna start this with a story. So when my daughter, her name is Maria, graduated from Jeff High, was in 3rd grade, she wanted to do a book report. And she came home and said, Dad, I want to do a story on Queen Nzinga. And I was like, Queen who? And a queen what? And so we ran and grabbed some books, and then I was like, oh, Queen Nzinga. Okay, I know what you're talking about. So she goes to school and she's her teacher. I want to do a story on Queen Nzinga. Her teacher then proceeds to tell her that Queen Nzinga is not a real person and that she should do her book report or her story on maybe somebody Beyonce who was famous. So I'm gonna let y'all do your own research, but Queen Nzinga in the early 1600s was one of the few people in Africa, in the continent of Africa, to fight Portuguese to keep slavery out of her country. So understand that she dies in 1663, parallel all the way forward to when the first slaves hit our land in 1619, right? So it takes some time for that to occur, right? And then we look at it from a standpoint of the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, right? So we're looking at what? Roughly 85 years before the last slave ship touches America in 1860. Y'all following me so far? So far? All right. So what happens in 1863? The American Revolution. Yep. What else? What was signed? Close. That was in 1776, the Emancipation Proclamation, but thank you. Absolutely. So the very reason, so when Martin Luther King is giving a speech in front of what? In DC, in front of the Lincoln Memorial, right? That's the cast of the journey of the time that we move from slavery, something we also call, which is Reconstruction, into civil rights. Y'all following me so far? All right. We're going to parallel all of that all the way into who's familiar with Juneteenth. Everybody, okay, a little bit of everybody's familiar with Juneteenth, cool. So 2 years later, after the emancipation, we're told that there's at least 2 more years before slaves are freed in the United States, correct? And that was in Texas. That's not the full truth either, right? It takes almost another 2 or 3 years to free all the slaves in the United States. Those were just the slaves in the South, because one of the parts of the story that we don't often tell is that slaves were also in the North, so New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, etc. So when you hear Martin talking about that this in 1968, that this is just the beginning, right? He's also paralleling what's going to come after, because what happens after we get civil rights, we're allowed to vote. Well, there are some other things that are occurring in our timeline. Anybody heard of the Blood Summers? No. So this is a period when African Americans are coming home from World War II, and they're wanting to move back into the homes that they lived in. And this is the beginning of race riots in almost 21 different cities across the country, specifically to keep black people, right, from doing what? Having homes, buying property, right? So when you look at this, there's this parallel that's consistently happening, but most of it is tied to the economic status that we all live in. And we see that very thing today. And I'll tap into that a little bit as well. So getting back to my daughter who wants to do this story on Queen Nzinga. So what we end up having to do is feeding the school system all the tools that they wanted in order for her to do this story on Queen Nzinga. And what's unique about that is that most of the journey when we talk about civil rights, outside of maybe Harriet Tubman, we don't hear about a lot of the women who were behind the scenes really leading the charge in much of this civil revolution, right?
There are many women. Harriet Tubman is the leader of the women rights movement.
Absolutely. There were lots of women. So with that being said, do y'all know where Martin Luther King got the idea of the I Have a Dream speech? Anybody? So during a community meeting in the South, around about 63, they were all having a conversation and they were engaging about what they're gonna do, where they're gonna march, different elements are happening, and there's a woman by the name of Prathia Hall who begins to do this prayer. And the prayer is titled, I Have a Dream. She's just sitting there singing, rocking back and forth, I have a dream, I have a dream. And so what later comes to life is Martin leans over and says, I'm gonna use that. And that is the delivery, right? That is the motif of what we're all talking about and where we're headed in a sense of understanding Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Now, that being said, I want to leave you with two quotes, right? So as we're talking about education, as we're talking about a timeline and how it threads the evolution of where we are in this country and in this space, James Baldwin said, there's a paradox in education is precisely this. That as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he's being educated in. And I lead that with thinking about equality and equity and addressing the inequities in our community, right? You're in school, do you ever question what you're learning and how you're getting the information? Do you ever wonder if there's another side of a story? Is there a hidden element? So a couple years ago, I decided I was gonna go teach at a university. And so my background is in business management and I want to teach a management class. And so they give me the management curriculum. And in the curriculum, it says something to the extent of, we no longer use the word slave master. We identify owners of businesses as CEOs. We no longer use the word slave. We now identify people as employees. What do you think about that? That's at a collegiate level. That's what they're teaching in the core business management program. Are you questioning your education? Do you question where the information comes from and how it's being delivered? This is part of Martin's speech. When we're talking about civil rights, we're also talking about education and how we're being educated, how we're being fed, how we move forward. Back to the questions I want you to think about and ponder. What does equity look like to you? In this community, in your school, in the small fiefdoms that you exist in, what is equity? How do you define it? How do you fight for it? Are you silent or are you boisterous about the things that are inequitable in those spaces? What does your racial community look like? And is it free and independent? Another question I asked, something also to ponder. I was sitting in a room with my daughter one day and I asked her what was the difference between freedom and independence. And she hadn't thought about it, right? I think she was about 17 at the time. I found it interesting that Martin is talking about freedom. Slaves were set free. We want freedom to be able to vote, freedom to be able to drink at a water fountain, freedom to use the same bathrooms. We're still having that debate a little bit, right, if you're a part of the alphabet community. But here's the thing. America signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776. What was still happening in 1776? Slavery, right? They weren't set free till later. But when you think about the challenges that the black and brown community have in today, we're still identifying freedoms and not independence. Independence is tied directly to what? Anybody want to guess?
I don't know. This was about the slaves. Didn't the Civil War start because of slavery?
She said, did Civil War start because of slavery? Yes and no. It started because of economics. Slavery was a tool, and we can't get too deep into this, but slavery was a tool to expand the economic power of this country, yes or no? Yeah? And many other countries in the same. But good question. So yes, we're talking about independence in that relationship. The last question I want to ask you, actually it's not the last, I got two more, but the last question I want you to think about and I want to ask you as we're having this conversation about civil rights and space. Am I there? No. All right, cool. Is when were you introduced to racism? When was the first time, and how did that change you? How did you feel? Just a question to ponder, something to think about amongst your friends. Or do you even talk about it, right? It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, green, yellow, or otherwise. So as you think about the I Have a Dream speech, what does it really mean to you? How do you plan to utilize that position, that motif, to define your future? Most of y'all are juniors and seniors, right? Juniors and seniors. So without tapping in too deep to the systemic challenges that we face in this country, we often as adults think about the times that we've had and our experiences and what we've done to change or better the community and societies that we live in. I wonder, have you done that? Are you thinking about the next 10 to 20 years, when you get older, what kind of jobs, what kind of family, who you're gonna marry, what society will look like, what it will be framed like? We're all coming out of a pandemic. We're all coming out of civil unrest, whether you're aware of it or not, participated in it or not. The next wave of the future will be framed by y'all. It will be your dream to bring it to life, right? How many people would prefer to wake up from the dream and act on it and have everything they ever wanted? You can just show of hands. You want everything you want. What do you want? Money? You want to be rich? Somebody want to be famous? Somebody don't want to be having this conversation. I got you. I didn't want to either, right? So here it is. I'm going to wrap up and say it like this. So I want to introduce you to one other person in the timeline, somebody y'all can go and look up. So we talked about Martin. I introduced you to Fred in the Rainbow Coalition. You know about Malcolm. You know about James Baldwin. The last person I want to introduce you to, and this is someone who you will not find in your history books. There's actually quite a few people, but you will not find this person specifically in your history books yet, but he's coming. And during the period, actually before there was a Malcolm and a Martin and a Fred, there was a gentleman in Louisville, Kentucky by the name of Dr. Pruitt Osley Sweeney. He was born around about, oddly enough, I didn't put when he was born, so we're gonna leave that alone. But I'll put it like this. Anybody familiar with Shiny Park, the Shiny golf courses in the West End? All right, so he is the individual who led the lawsuit to make sure that they were desegregated. That was happening in round about 1947. And in 1939, he led the lawsuit to make sure that there was equal pay. 1936, he led the lawsuit for equal pay for black and white teachers. Anybody watch the news? What have we been arguing about nationally? Teachers being underpaid, right? We're gonna run with that TikTok. That's a good guess. That means you're just listening. And in 1939, he sued the city of Louisville to make sure that we have equitable housing and that black folks were not being moved into, or Hispanic people were not being moved into projects. So again, Dr. P.O. Sweeney, somebody else for you to think about as you move through Martin Luther King Week, the speech, I Have a Dream, and ask yourself, what do you dream and what does your future look like? On that note, I know we're about time. I'll wrap up and I'll say thank you for your time. I hope that I gave you a little bit of information, probably more than you wanted. If you have questions, let me know. Thank you.